Okay. Well, I'm glad to see so many of you have joined us tonight. As we go through this, I am going to adjust this a little bit. Uh, Last week, I did a lot of talking. And so I'm going to try and incorporate a few more times of questions, and hopefully you have the opportunity then to talk. We're also going to try and figure out a way, though, to go down the list so that everyone can have an opportunity to kind of share an answer if they so choose. You can also say, though, no, that's okay, or go on to the next person, please. And that's perfectly all right. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully you can see it clear enough. Dun, dun, dun. Hopefully that's big enough that you can read that. So if you don't already have it, I would encourage you to please grab a handy dandy Bible so that you have one available. Go ahead and open it up to Exodus, the first chapter, because we are actually going to cover the very first 13 chapters tonight as we go through this. Now, I don't expect you to have already read this. If you want to, after we're done with the class, you can go through and read every single chapter. I am at the very end then going to give you homework, if you so choose, that next week then you can read ahead for that class. So, begin our time together. I'm going to first enter into the story. At the end of Genesis, we have the Hebrew people, the people of Israel, the people who were given the promise from God. They went down to the land of Egypt, and it was Joseph who welcomed them there, and he was the second most powerful man in all of the land, only second to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. As he welcomed everyone then, they became citizens of Egypt. However, it wasn't exactly an ideal situation. As time goes on, Joseph becomes forgotten. There becomes a ruler who is no longer aware of who Joseph was or what Joseph had done for the people of Egypt or the people around there. How they helped him through the famine, how he helped them understand who God was and what God was doing, or even the Pharaoh. A new Pharaoh came to power. By the way, those of you who are following along, we're still in chapter 1. It was, though, the Egyptians that began viewing those Hebrew people almost as second-class citizens, as outsiders, as people who really didn't belong here, but they're here in our country. And so we begin to bear witness to some jealousy, some animosity, some strife beginning to happen among the people. God continues to bless them. And so even the Egyptians look upon the Hebrew people and are just kind of, well, perplexed, a little jealous and a little bit envious of what it is the Hebrew people are able to have. Many of them were herdsmen, and their herds began growing and flourishing, and their wealth began, well, growing beyond belief. As time went on, slavery became gradual, where there was a jealousy, a separation of the two people, where the Egyptians were above and the Hebrew people were below. And they began setting them up as, you can have certain tasks, you can have certain jobs, you can have certain things that we don't necessarily want to do or get our hands dirty with, and so we're going to allow you to have them. And slowly it changed, it shifted to, now not only is this your job, this is something you're required to do. Slavery then just became accepted. This took place over the course of a few generations, over a course of time in which people began to realize and just kind of accept it as the norm of the society. any questions at all, please don't hesitate to either post them in the chat, so then that way we know exactly what it is, and then I can try and address them, okay? Seeing none, I'm going to keep us moving along. For those of you who haven't seen The Prince of Egypt, I really do encourage you to watch it. There we bore witness to the slaves crying out to God, asking for him to deliver us, reminding God that they are there suffering in slavery, and yet they're reminded of what had taken place in Genesis, the promise of a promised land in which they would be enjoying milk and honey, in which they would be his people and they would be his God. It's there that we bear witness to the struggle, the strife, and the tribulations that the Hebrew people were enduring in Egypt. How many of you have seen The Prince of Egypt? You can either raise your hand or say yes in the chat. Or no. I'm thinking we're going to have to watch this sometime, because it really does highlight a good story, and it gives everyone a good visualization. Portions of it. Okay, so a few of you may be familiar with it. Well, in the midst of this, the slavery of the Hebrew people and the strife that they are enduring, they are building up the nation of Egypt, but it's all on their back. It's because of their shoulders. That might be a good Sunday night watch party. Absolutely. But then it comes to the next key figure, Moses. Now, Moses is someone many people have heard about. He's someone that his story is somewhat, well-known and kind of a legend. He was born as a Hebrew slave, but the Pharaoh at that time gave an edict, an order, that every male child under the age of 2 years old should be thrown into the river Nile. It was a justification of population control in order to have the Hebrew people be, controlled. It was a means then of having control, power, and authority, and that even Pharaoh had the life of all the Hebrew people in his very hand, that if he spoke, they would answer. His mother couldn't do it, though. His mother placed him in a basket, put him in the river, and had his sister, Miriam, follow the basket in the reeds to see where he would go, how he would survive, and what would happen. She placed her trust in God that her child, her son, would actually be saved. So there was just a question asked in the chat below of, was there a prophecy too? There isn't really a prophecy. There is some ancient lore that there would be a person among them that would raise up a Messiah, a deliverer, who would take them out of the land of Egypt and to that promised land. It's often then attributed to not only Moses to be the Messiah or chosen one of God, but it's also then applied to Jesus later on. That we have this understanding of a deliverer, a Messiah, someone who would lead, guide, and take us to the promised land of fulfillment, a place where we would then find God's comfort, God's peace, and God's promise would then be fulfilled. Moses' sister Miriam is watching the basket from the reeds, and she bears witness that the basket goes from the river Nile into the palace pools of water. And it's there that Pharaoh's sister discovers the basket, takes the child that's in there, and has it as her own son. Raises him as a child of the royal family, as a prince of Egypt. So he's taught, he's educated, he raises up with the same power, the same authority. He didn't even know that he was Hebrew, and he thought he was an Egyptian. He walked, he talked, he even danced like an Egyptian. Yes, punny 80s reference. Don't go there? Okay. But it was Miriam, the sister of Moses, who then went to Pharaoh's sister who found her brother Moses and said, I know of a woman who could take care of this child like it would be her very own, that she could nurse him, she could care for them, and then that way you would have time to do everything else that you would need to do. And she's a slave woman. Coincidentally, it was his own mother who was then able to raise Moses, watch him grow, and care for him. But not in her own home. It was in the Pharaoh's home. He had every privilege that the palace had to offer. He had everything that he could ever want. And everyone looked to him to be one of the great leaders, the great powers in Egypt. Moses' life, though, takes a drastic turn. He kills an Egyptian guard. Now, many of us would say, he killed someone? That's awful. Did he stand trial then? Well, keep in mind, he's of the royal family. When he did this, the next thought was, how can we cover it up? And yet grief overcame him. He was overwhelmed by the very fact that he took the life of someone else. How could he do this? He must answer for what it is he has done. Yet it is in this grief that he began to realize something. He realized that he's not like everyone else. He discovers that he's a Hebrew, a person of the slaves, yet of privilege and honor in the royal family. How can this be? What does this mean? How could this have possibly have happened? He flees all of Egypt, goes out to the wilderness. It's here in the midst that he's trying to find himself. He's trying to discover what it is he's trying to be, what it is he's supposed to be in the world. For many of us, we call this adolescence, a time in which we're trying to find ourselves, a time when we're trying to figure out who we are, what we're supposed to do in this life and in this world, and truly, what does God call us to be? How am I supposed to live up to these expectations of my parents? What are my expectations? What are my desires of this world? I think many of us probably feel that way right now. I want to go out and do this. I want to go outside of my home. I want to be able to do. I want to be able to be. And I don't feel like I can. It's holding me back. And there's a tension, a struggle, a fear. Something that grips us. And Moses felt that too. It's there in the wilderness where he experiences a burning bush. Now, for any of you who've ever watched, well, maybe the 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston, that burning bush experience, you're able to see, you're able to visualize what it is that means. God speaks to Moses. This is something that many people would love to have in their own life. God clearly saying, I'm going to have you go do this. I want you to be this. I want you to do this. And I'm going to provide for you everything so that you can succeed at this. Oh, that sounds amazing. Sign me up. It's here at the burning bush where God says, I have heard the cries of my people. Those cries that we just heard at the very beginning in the video. You will be my people, and I will be your God once again. Do you know what Moses' response was? If we're looking in our Bibles, it's Exodus chapter 3. God says, the name that you will know me as is I am who I am. Thus you shall say to all the Israelites, I am has sent me. Verse 14. Moses responds, though, with this answer. Send someone else. I don't want to go. I don't have the gifts. I don't have the abilities. I don't have what it is you're longing for. Moses is often known as not an eloquent speaker. This was the biblical way of saying he had a speech impediment. Was it a lisp? Was it a stutter? Was it something else? We don't know. It's never mentioned. But I'm often amazed how many of us don't have a calling from God that we should go out and do something. We should go out and be a part of something. And our answer is, can't someone else do it? Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever had a calling from God and your immediate answer was, someone else can do that, right? That's not a rhetorical question, by the way. I'm seeing a few head nods. Moses is a character, a person who we can relate to. Someone who feels inadequate. Someone who's going on this journey of life feeling lost, feeling helpless. And then God comes along and says, I choose you. You're going to be my messenger. You're going to go to my people. To do what? You'll find out. Moses is actually convinced to go to Egypt by the power of God, by miracles and illness. As you go on in Exodus 4, there's a lot of revelation going on here, a revealing of who God is and the power of God, in which, notably, Moses takes his arm, uncovers it, and it's clean. He covers it with a sleeve, pulls it back, and it's covered in boils. How did this happen? And God says to him, take your sleeve, put it back over your arm, and pull it back again. And it was clean. God was showing him, what I say will happen, happens. What I do in this world will be done. It's a struggle, though, for Moses. How can he do this? How should he do this? Why should he do this? God gives him the ability to perform his own miracles. Moses was a shepherd, and so he always had a staff with him. A good shepherd always has a staff, a good sturdy walking stick, in which you're able to fight off predators, you're able to walk the dangerous terrain, and the ability to then also corral, stretch out your arm, and get that one sheep that just seems to always wander. And it is through that staff that Moses is able to do miracles. he uses those abilities when he goes and speaks to Pharaoh. This is the same Pharaoh who grew up as a brother to him, who he knew in the palace, who probably learned right next to him, the same school, the same class, the same everything. And now he had to go and stand before him and say, you need to change your ways. Yes, those words of, let my people go. Have you ever had to do that? Talk to someone and you knew the message would not be well received? It's a humbling experience, to say the least. You wonder, will your friendship survive? Will it even be there at the end? Will they explode at you in anger? Will they thank you for doing this? How will they react? It's here where Moses takes his staff and the staff turns into a serpent, a viper. Well, that's not very extraordinary. A wooden staff turning into a viper. The Pharaoh has his own magicians do the same thing. However, it is in this event where Moses's viper, his serpent, eats the other serpents, the vipers of the magicians, showing the true power, showing the authority of God and the power that Moses speaks. That Pharaoh needs to listen, to wake up. Pharaoh refuses. Moses goes back and says, then I'm sorry you bring this upon yourself. Plagues will come upon the land of Egypt until your heart is no longer hardened and you let my people go. You must release my people. God, the creator of all, calls you to do it. Pharaoh, a king, doesn't like being told what to do. How many of you like being told what to do? I see of you shaking your heads. Yeah, None of you. No one likes being told what to do or how to do something. We would much rather run into the brick wall 3 times than have one person say, you shouldn't do that way. Okay, maybe 4 or 5 times, whichever you choose. Pharaoh says to Moses, you have just made the work harder for your people. Now, they must gather their own straw to make the bricks. Those mud bricks that we saw at the very beginning, where they were making and mixing the mud, the sand, the water, and the straw together, and then putting it into forms and then letting them dry, hoisting them up. Now they would double their work, in which they must now gather everything that is needed. They must go farther, and their production of bricks must double every single day. Or else they will not be able to rest. Any questions about anything so far? Am I explaining everything that well that everyone's like, oh yeah, I get it? I'll take the smiles as a yes. Oh, thank you. For many of us, we know these plagues. The plagues that were brought onto Egypt to show the power and authority of God. Moses takes his staff, puts it in the river Nile, and all of the water turns to blood. From here, the frogs, the lice, the flies, and then the livestock. Boils upon your own flesh. But it's not only things that happen seemingly naturally. Hail drops from the sky. Locusts fly in, eating up the crops and taking away people's lives, their future, their hope. And then darkness descends upon the land. And perhaps more widely known, what's more familiar to many people, is the 10th and final plague. The death of the firstborn. Now, this is something where it's not Moses' call. It's not the last plague that he had wanted. It was something that after the 9th, he went and talked to Pharaoh and he said, "What are you going to do now? Will you let my people go? After darkness descended upon the land of Egypt, what shall you do?" And Pharaoh's response is, "My father had it right. He was the one who showed me how to control you Hebrew people. All your firstborn male children will be killed." Pharaoh brings the plague against himself. What he was going to enact against the Hebrew people is now going to be brought against his own people. I've got another video for you. Now, this is also from the Prince of Egypt. So again, if you haven't watched it, I really encourage you to go do that. So true, Mike. Mike just commented that in the movie they show Moses as a young man. However, in the scriptures, it does talk about Moses being 80 years old. As we go through this, there are some creative licensing. There is some dramatic, I'll say, presence in all of this, especially within a movie. That's why I really do encourage you. Open your Bible, read about it, engage in that story, see what else, because yes, there is a lot more in there than maybe what you yourself has read the first time, the second time, the third time, that you would now be able to see. For those of you who are following along in your Bible, we are in Exodus chapter 6 now. Now we have that final plague. It is in the midst of all of those that then, especially in the video, and this is why I wanted you to see it, many of these things are connected. When Moses turned the Nile River into blood, the water became polluted. The water became a non-habitable place for a lot of those creatures that were there. Well, when the creatures aren't able to live there anymore, they want to get out. So one of the creatures that was able to have legs and get out were frogs. So they went into the Egyptians' homes trying to find a new home for themselves to now have a place to live, to belong, and survive. When they did not find it, many of them died. When there's large piles of carcasses, I'll just say, lying around, gnats, lice, disease, pestilence, I'll just say, often runs rampant. When there's also those same carcasses flies come around. So you begin to see how each one of these are connected, that as you bear witness to the things unfolding, the plagues are connected to one another, and how the trials, the tribulations seem to mount on top of one another. As the water around them is polluted, as animals are around them dying, hygiene itself is not able to really be up to what it was before. And so boils and skin diseases were more rampant. We bear witness to the same connections, to the same trials, the tribulations of how each one of those then are together. All right. Are there any questions at this time? Okay, well then I'm just going to remind you, please insert it in the chat, so then that way we can capture that. Oh, yep.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I've got my Bible here and I'm looking at it. I'm looking at chapter 6, and I noticed that on verse 14, it goes into the genealogy of Moses and Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't read it because we're just now going over this, but what is the importance of that?
So the genealogy really does kind of highlight how it's all connected. If we go through Genesis and we're going through all the different people that we experience, how God has chosen the different people and the promises, how it does go through father to son. You may remember in Genesis when we studied that, wow, a while ago. It's been almost last year in January, February, I think, when we studied that. I'm going to have to redo that, I guess. But we had not the chosen son, not the favored one, not the oldest son, who was then given the promise of God. Here, when we do bear witness to this then, Aaron was actually the oldest son. Moses was the second-born son, but was under the age of 2, so he was the one who was under the age of 2 in order to do the population control at that time. So when we look at that genealogy, it's really kind of laying out for us an understanding of where this all comes from, drawing those connections for us to see. Keep in mind as well, we're back in an ancient society where men had power and authority, women had power and authority in a different way in the home, but not out in public. However, the Hebrew people were very much matriarchal, where the mother was the one who determined, were you born Jewish or were you not? Does that answer your question, Cindy? Great. Any others while we're here? Yep, exactly. For the Jewish people to see the genealogy of Moses and Aaron. Okay, well then I'm going to keep us moving. And yes, there will be time at the end for more questions. The very last plague, the 10th plague, where the angel of death descends, Passover takes place. This is the last thing in order for the people to receive their freedom. This last plague breaks the will and the heart of Pharaoh. It is in this last plague where his own son dies. And it's too much for him. He can't stand it anymore. And he lets the people go. The angel of death descends and destroys the firstborn son of every Egyptian household. But for the Hebrew people, that's right, there's a Passover. That's why we have Passover. That's why the Hebrew people still celebrate it even today. While Egypt suffers, the Hebrew people flourish. But it is during this Passover meal, during this Passover event that they are required to have a meal. They are told to actually go, oh, whoops, we need to fast forward here. 11, we are going to Exodus chapter 12, if you're following along in your Bibles. In the Passover meal, they are asked to have two very important things. One, make bread, but make it hurriedly. You cannot have time for it to raise up, because for any of you who've ever baked bread before, it takes a while for the yeast to really react and for the bread to rise. There's no time for that. Make an unleavened bread, a bread without yeast. Think of our own modern day pita bread that you would get at the grocery store or even bake at home. Another common bread is a naan bread. The other thing would be to take a lamb, and it would be this lamb that is offered, that is sacrificed and killed for this meal, that you will take the blood of that lamb and put it on the doorposts of your home. And this will be a sign to the angel of death to pass over this household. For they are a household that honors God's commands, and no one shall be harmed there. If your household is too small, that a lamb is too big for you, join a neighbor and eat the meal with them. If your family's too big, part up, divide, so that way everyone will be able to have some of the bread, everyone will be able to have some of the lamb, because it's important for them to be able to recognize that God is the bread of life, and this lamb was sacrificed for you, that you might live. It's in this meal that they're also instructed to dress a certain way. They are to dress as if they're ready to go on a journey, that they're about ready to leave. They're going on a long journey. To eat of it hurriedly, with your staff in your hand, your outer cloak already on. It would look like many of us wearing our coats, our jackets, and all of our best before we go on a journey, and we're sitting down for a Sunday brunch, and we're going to eat it as quickly as possible. We're not there to enjoy the meal. We're there to be reminded of what it is that's taking place for us. There's a lot of echoes here of communion, of the Last Supper. We'll talk about that more later on. At the end of this plague, the Hebrew people do go free. In fact, many of the Egyptians help the Hebrew people leave. They give them gold, they give them silver, they give them a lot of things, animals, wealth, anything and everything. They want the people out of the land. It's because of these people that these plagues have been really burdening them, destroying their own nation. That if they get rid of these people, then everything will be right. Everything will go back to normal, and then everything will be right. And things can return to the way they used to be. We're at the end of our lesson tonight. So if you have any questions, I invite you to please type them in the chat or go unmute yourself and then ask the question. Then my other question to you is, what did you learn that surprised you in this, that you didn't know before, or you were reminded of tonight? I'm just going to go down the list here, and I'm just going to ask you, do you have any questions, or did you have anything you'd like to share? And the first one on my list is Cheryl.
You're so bad. Well, it's just really interesting because when I got about 2 weeks into all the hysteria with COVID, when I was talking with people, I said, the only way I can think to describe it is like the Passover. I'm sitting here hoping this thing passes. I can keep dodging it so I don't get it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I can stay in my house and I can be safe. And so this has been a visual for me for 6-7 weeks. It still is, you know, sometimes. So just interesting.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Next on my list is Eric.
One, I need to watch that movie again. I guess would be the first thing. Second thing, actually, I guess is more. So, how old was Moses when he died? Because he leads them. I know this is kind of jumping forward and everything, but the question was that he was 80, and back then, if I remember correctly, age was different.
Right.
So, because am I right that Moses lives to 500?
I think he goes to 650, I believe is how old he is when he dies. But we'll talk about that.
Well, the reason why I asked this is
Sure.
because of age being different back then.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, by the time he was 80, considerably, he would be somewhat of a younger man in the lifespan.
Right. We're not talking about the same calendar that we are today.
Okay.
Our solar Gregorian calendar that we have, that we use, that you know kind of see all the time, that we're in now 2020,
Right.
really was developed in 1300s
Right.
by a monk, and so it too is a little bit off. And theirs is actually a lunar calendar, so it's based off of the sun. And there's some discrepancy here of how many months are there in one of their years, how many days are in a year, all of those kind of are raised into questions, and different scholars will actually have different rationales.
Right.
Because they'll actually go from new moon to new moon as being a month, because they're based on the sun, or on the moon, excuse me. And so there's a lot of discrepancies there as to how you would break that down for the year.
Gotcha. Okay, that was my question.
Oh, okay. Hey, glad to help.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you. Next on my list is Jim and Cheryl.
Okay. Well, I was just wondering, I'd forgotten completely about the lice and the flies. This is a mess. But then I was also wondering, I'd forgotten that they had their babies killed as well.
Yep.
That was pretty serious. It made them ready to want to leave.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And my question is about Aaron, Moses' brother.
Yes.
Now, is that a half brother? Is that a brother that's younger? No.
So
they combined the family, his real family, together in the palace?
So, okay. Moses goes off to live in the palace. Aaron and his sister Miriam stay as slaves. Okay?
Mother and father.
Yep, with his mother and father. Moses goes off into the wilderness, and then when he returns from the wilderness and God's call, he comes back and then is with his own brother and his sister, and he knows who they are and that they are family.
So Aaron is younger, and he was born.
Aaron is older, as is Miriam.
how did Moses actually realize that he was a Hebrew?
So when he had killed the Egyptian guard, and they were trying to cover things up, he went through, for lack of a better word, a discernment in his own grief and a questioning of where he came from and what happened. And it was in that time that he went to his own mother, and his mother, not Hebrew mother, Pharaoh mother, as he knew her, and she shared with him that, well, you were Hebrew. And it kind of set him back. Where he came from, what he knew, and what it is then his life had become, it sent him into a little bit of a tailspin of who he is, what he should do next, and what's his purpose truly.
All right. Thank you.
Good question, Teresa. Where do we find that? Oh boy, I'm trying to remember if that is recorded in scripture or if that is in Exodus chapter 2, the 11th verse is where it really starts, where he beats and kills the Egyptian guard. And he begins that kind of journey and process. Yeah, it's in chapter 2. I'll let you read it for yourself. How's that? Yep. All right. Thank you, Jim and Cheryl. I'm going to keep us going down the list here. Miss Joanne Stanley.
Well, I don't really have any questions about tonight.
Okay.
I just want to read it and get all the details. But are we going to finish Exodus next week?
So we're going to keep going, and up on your screen is what we're going to, kind of your homework assignment, I'll say, is we're going to go to Exodus 13 through 18.
Okay.
From the Red Sea to Sinai. And so actually I've got a series here where we're going to read through together all of Exodus, because I feel like that there's a lot in here that relates and connects to what it is we're experiencing right now in the world around us.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, thank you, Miss Joanne. And next on my list are the Marquards, Kimball and Lorraine. Do you have any questions or information or insights that you learned from tonight?
Go ahead.
She's shaking her head no.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you
So-
can see that.
So why can't he see that?
I can too.
So throughout the Bible, we've seen presentations of. Can I get that, please? Somebody's at the door.
Gotcha.
Sorry.
Kaylee's got a question though too, apparently. Can we come back to you, Kimball?
We've had. I'm so sorry about this.
Oh no, that's okay. It happens.
Throughout the Bible, we've had illustrations of conversions through God's work.
Mm-hmm.
And believers changing. Why do you think the Pharaoh didn't read the writing on the wall when Moses was showing him how powerful his God was?
it's one of those times where we can look at Pharaoh and sometimes see ourselves, where our own selves, our hearts get hardened. We don't want to hear what it is God is trying to reveal to us. In our own lives, we bear witness to God's miraculous wonder and calling and purpose, and yet we say, I'm going to go this way instead. And so we also can ask ourselves the same question. Why do we do that? There is note, though, too, where God hardened the heart of Pharaoh. So some of this is to reveal God's power, God's authority in the world, not only for the Hebrew people, but for all the nations of the world, because Egypt was a powerful nation in which other nations would come to trade and engage in story and other attributes. And so they would be able to hear as well, well, there's great turmoil going on in Egypt. What's going on there? The God of Hebrew people is overpowering them. How can this be? What's going on there? Should we know something? And so the story does unfold for them to be able to understand the Hebrew people and the Egyptians and other nations as well. Anything else, Kimball?
Nope, that was a good answer. Thank you.
Okay, yep.
It made me think.
Okay. Sorry, I'm jumping back into chat real quick because I saw a couple of things bounce up. Okay. I'm going to keep us going down the line. Mr. Mahavix. And Mrs. Mahavix, too.
Howdy.
Hi. So, what, you want me to ask it?
Go ahead. You
Okay.
got the question.
So, when Jesus had his Last Supper, was that was a celebration of Passover, correct?
Correct. Yep.
So why do they not? Why do we, when we do communion, why don't we use unleavened bread? Is it just because we're trying to be more? We're not worried about what kind of bread it is anymore. Or, I mean, I always thought that if we're doing that, isn't it supposed to be a symbol of that same thing?
I'm not Jewish.
We're not Jewish. Oh, you're right. Michael already answered my question.
Great. You can answer your own question. That's great.
I think that's why the Catholics have the wafer, right? Because that's unleavened bread.
So as really the tradition has it, is it truly is bread, whether it is unleavened bread or whether it is leavened bread. It's truly the meal that you are a part of. And a lot of cultures will change the bread based on what it is that's available to them, what it is that they have for availability. In the midst of it all, though, some places will still do only unleavened bread because they want it to be authentic. However, when Jesus was sitting down at the Last Supper, it was a meal of the Passover. And in that meal, he went through the whole process. He went through the whole story. He engaged in all of these events going on. However, it was in the midst of it all that he then picked up the bread, the unleavened bread, and he changed the meaning. He shifted it, and this is supposed to be the unleavened bread.
Okay.
Instead,
that makes sense.
This is my body. And actually, in the Passover meal, there's supposed to be several cups of wine. And he takes one of the cups that's reserved for Elijah. I think it's the 4th cup or the 5th cup. Anyway, he takes one of the cups, and that's when he says, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, shed for you and for all people. So he takes not only this meal, but he changes it. Still a connection to God, still a delivery of the people from where it is they were to the promised land, and a promise being fulfilled, but in a new way.
I didn't think of it that way. That's cool.
So, yeah.
You have something else? Thank you, Pastor.
Yep. Mike, did you have one?
I'm good. Thank you.
All right. Going right down the line here, Miss Teresa Ward. Are you with us?
Yes, my iPad died, so I just got back on.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
I missed the last little bit. No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Then Miss Cindy Niedebitz. Oh, there you go.
I got to unmute. So at the end of chapter 12, it says that the Israelites had lived in Egypt for 430 years.
Yes.
Now, I had always thought in my mind that nobody who was leaving Egypt would have remembered coming there. In other words, would not have known that. But in the way they count age, could there not have been, there could have been people that came as very young people, because if Moses lives to 500.
So keep in mind too, Moses experienced life vastly different than many of the slaves. Slaves don't get exactly quality food. They're not very well taken care of. They put their body and life in very harmful positions. Slaves don't exactly last very long because they're not often considered people. More often than not, I'll say people lived long enough maybe to have a child. And if they did live long enough to have grandchildren, it was amazing. So for many people, they did not remember coming to Egypt. They did not remember coming to from the promised land here, because keep in mind this, we had a time from when they traveled from the promised land to Egypt, living there, being citizens, gradually shifting over a few generations into slavery, and then becoming slaves. I just saw a chat pop up. Moses lived to be 120 years old. Oh, Deuteronomy 34. There you go. Thanks, Mike. Okay. Did that answer your question, Cindy? I'll take that as a yes. Mr. Vern Steinman, you're up. Oh, you're still muted, though. Vern, are you able to unmute yourself?
There we go. Hey, so what was the timeline? Because did the plague and everything kill off all the animals, or just the cattle? Because these people had meat for the Passover. So what's our timeline there between when those things would have happened?
We're probably talking weeks. Between really, we're probably talking every 2 to 3 days, maybe 4 days at the longest maybe a week, I'll say. The timeline really isn't well noted. It would be it would be maybe just a few days is what I'm estimating. This is more my guess here right off the top of my head. But also keep in mind, it does not kill all the livestock, but it does afflict the livestock.
Okay. And then, so when did Moses know about the 10 Commandments?
The 10 Commandments come on Mount Sinai, which is next lesson.
But well, because I was, referencing the killing the guard. if thou shalt not kill.
Oh, yeah. No, the 10 Commandments had not been delivered yet. That doesn't come until 20, Exodus 20, maybe.
Okay.
We've got a few chapters. So, anything else? All right. Let me just double check the chat, make sure I didn't miss anything. That looks like everything. So, if you wouldn't mind, send me an email. What did you think about this? Did you like it? Did you see anything that I could improve? I'm always willing to adjust something. If you liked the videos, if you want to go watch it, maybe we could do a Sunday night watch party of somehow, some way, maybe even on here. I don't know how that would work, but we could then watch it together. Lastly, your homework, if you so want to call it that, is Exodus 13 through 18. And if you want to go back and read 1 through 13, you can do that too.
So we have a technical question.
Okay, what's that?
We'd like to know if the lag is coming from you or sources out here when we see jerky screens, or like we dropped off, Teresa dropped off. Trying to think how we can make our experience better on this end.
Gotcha. How often?
Up to answer it.
How often is it happening?
Well, like right now.
Well, like you saw it earlier when we were chatting today. Right now, I'm seeing you're a jerky movement.
But everybody else is clear.
Everybody else is clear.
Okay. Let me run some tests on my end.
Teresa said her iPad died. So
right. Let me run a test on my end for next week to make sure my internet is up to standard.
Well, I know we're running wireless right here. I'm going to try wired to see if that makes a difference, because I have no idea how many wireless devices are in this house. I'm sure there's more than I realize. And they all suck it, don't they?
I was going to say that it could be on y'all's end or on Pastor's. Also, because we have so many pictures going on, the more movement happens. It could be the camera itself trying to lag on and pick up that movement.
Yeah.
But like Pastor's completely frozen on mine now. So
right, same with us.
So that
Joanne keeps jumping from her picture to just a no picture.
Well, that is actually because she's on her phone.
Yeah.
So that it kind of does that on phones.
Okay. I thought she was just flashing us.
That and here we're having a Bible study, and Kimball called the pastor a jerk. I can't believe it.
I didn't hear that.
He said you were jerking around.
Oh. I see how it is. All right.
Well,
very, very, very good presentation, Pastor.
Well, thank you.
I was reading along, and I actually could, for the most part, keep up with it. I did have a question, though. You said you were in chapter 6, and if I was listening to your commentary correctly, I was already in 11.
Oh, yeah, you're right, because that would have been the plague. Yep. You were correct.
No, the book was correct.
Right. Well, okay. The Bible.
I'm not trying to call you on it. I'm just making sure I wasn't missing something.
Nope. You're good. Hey, even pastors make mistakes. I'll admit that.
Well, you keep telling me this is all interpretation, so we interpreted it as chapter 6, right?
Yep.
Cheryl's not saying anything, but I see her ears wiggling. She's got something to say.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for tonight's Bible study. If you want to hang around here a little bit longer, you most certainly can. I am going to stop the recording though. If you would like to join us next week, you're still on the list. Just let us know if you don't want to be on there or anything else.